I don't want. Well, welcome to the YAHOWAH blog. I'm here with Wookie today, and we're doing episode 24 of the presentation of Shabuah in Qatsyr harvest. It is the next harvest of the three that are part of YAHOWAH's annual plan for us to walk from our very troubled world to his covenant family. As we have learned, the first of the three harvests occurs as a result of Pesach and Matzah, because it is Bikurim, after we are made immortal, because the doorway to life was opened by Dod in his second of three lives, when he fulfilled Pesach as the Passover lamb in 33 CE, which was year 4000 Yah. He then carried our guilt on his soul into Sheol, depositing it there, never to be seen again, perfecting us as a result of unyeasted bread. Then, the next day, he became the ultimate expression of the title that YAHOWAH has bequeathed upon him, Bokor, which means firstborn son, as he ushered in the opportunity for us to be the firstborn children of the covenant family on Bikurim. This then leads to the possibility of the Shabuah harvest, where the beneficiaries of Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim can be once again enriched, empowered, enlightened, enabled by God, a double opportunity and a tenfold increase this time on Shabuah. Shabuah will be fulfilled as the name indicates. It means 7 years before the fulfillment of the final three of the 7 Moed Mikre, Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah in year 6000 Yah, which is 2033. When we subtract 7 years from those dates, and we come upon the day that Shabuah will be celebrated in that year, which is 2026, it is the Shabat of May 22nd. In 2026, again, 7 years before YAHOWAH's return with Dod. So this is what we're discussing, and there are just so many elements and insights that YAHOWAH provides regarding it. We're now working our way through the Torah to see what other shades and indications that God has provided so that we would be ready to capitalize upon this opportunity. And those who do, most of them anyway, will be able to avoid this hellish time that is quickly coming upon us, called the time of Yaakov's troubles. Sar meaning troubles, and Yaakov being a synonym for Yisrael. As bad as things are now, and for Israel, they are horrific. They're going to get far worse, and actually quite soon. So as we return to our review, we were in the midst of excoriating the Christian New Testament. And the reason we're doing so is that the Christian religion is nothing but a counterfeit of the truth, where they replaced all of the promises and achievements, the accolades that are appropriately due to David, as our Messiah, as the Son of God, as the returning King, as the one who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim, and afforded them to a mythical misnomer that was once called Iusu Christu. And they also misappropriated one of the 7 Moed Mikre, the very one we're talking about now, which is why we need to expose their lies. They took Shabuah and renamed it Pentecost. And rather than being a harvest where people are withdrawn, it now becomes the birth of their God-forsaken church. And of course, in our last program, one of the things that I asked people to look for is to find a reference to Pentecost, anywhere in the Torah, because if it was fulfilled, there would have to be a mention of it. Otherwise, it's not a fulfillment. To find somewhere in the Torah and prophets a mention of the very concept of a church, since that's what the result was supposed to be. But of course, there is none. Find a mention of a Christ or a Christian somewhere in the Torah and prophets. Once again, there is none. So this cannot be a fulfillment of anything. It is therefore nothing but a crude counterfeit of what Yahowah wanted his people to know and to enjoy. So as we continue, we read, and immediately there came into existence out of heaven the sound of information and news, moving inwardly and upholding the breath of spiritual life and filling the whole household where they were residing. Acts 2:2. So this is Luke's rendition of whatever Peter may have told him, or he may have just made the entire story up to please his boss, Paul. But let's just look at the errors. First of all, Shabuah is not immediately. Well, the Christian New Testament and Acts would have you believe that it occurred immediately after Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, none of which they bother to mention, which are the first three Moed Mikre, which make Shabuah possible. Shabuah is a Bakurim harvest. The immediacy, they were off by 1,993 years, to be exact. I don't think that's immediately, even if you were Methuselah. I think he only lived, half of that time. So no, it was not immediately. There came into existence, no, exactly the opposite. On Shabuah, those who are members of the covenant family leave this earthly existence. So rather than coming into existence, they leave the human existence here on earth. And it says out of heaven, just the opposite. Shabuah is fulfilled when, rather than out from heaven, we go out of earth into heaven. The sound of information and news is what follows. And of course, even that's the opposite, because we are now the sound of information and news about Shabuah, about what each of the seven Moed Mikre represent. And it is the very voice providing the Bashar in Hebrew, heralding the news that will be taken in a harvest on Shabuah. So it is going to be the absence of information and news rather than the pouring out of information and news. Like a compelling force. No, Yahowah does not compel. And in all of his Moed Mikre, it is our choice as to whether we wish to participate or not. And in this particular case, those who participate will have met all five conditions of the Bereth covenant, and they will have attended and benefited from each of the seven Moed Mikre, celebrating them on an annual basis with Yahowah, knowing Yahowah's name, which of course didn't exist within Christianity. They had no clue as to what the covenant represented. In fact, they created their own new one because they didn't like the old one. And they don't celebrate any of the other seven Moed Mikre. So it would leave them out of this entirely. But just the word compelling and force is the opposite of what's going to occur on this time. And it says moving inwardly and upholding the breath of spiritual life. Actually, the Spirit is not coming down on Shabuah, but just the opposite. Those who are filled with the Spirit of Yahowah will be withdrawn at this time. And we're not moving inwardly, we're moving upwardly. And it says, and filling the whole household where they were residing. It's hard to imagine that, first of all, that anyone could get every single word in a statement wrong, but that there would be billions of those who would believe that this is from God when every statement is obviously wrong. If you study anything to do with Shabuah, you would know that if you were a beneficiary of it, rather than the household being filled where they were residing, the household where they were residing would be empty. That's the nature of an ingathering or harvest. So Acts 2:2 got everything wrong. Just the opposite than what Luke portrays. Rather than heaven coming down on Shabuah, the beneficiaries of the harvest leave the earth for Shamaim. As for the news regarding this day, it is being voiced by the Bashar Herald serving Dode, albeit nearly 2 millennia later than this particular date, and he is among those being withdrawn. The time of the compelling force is long past. Yahweh used a strong and compelling hand to draw his people out of Mitzrayim 3,400 years ago, but he is on record in Jeremiah 31, saying that he won't ever do that again, especially with regard to the restoration of his covenant. So you either come willingly or not at all. There will be no participants in this harvest who come kicking and screaming. Further, the purpose of Shabuah is to fill heaven with the souls of the covenant's children. It is not to fill a household on earth, just the opposite. Also, as the recipient of Yahweh's 7 spirits, to accomplish the mission of cultivating the Shabuah Qatsyr, I know a thing or two, especially 7, about how God communicates. And I can testify without equivocation that this is not how the set-apart spirit operates in our lives. And a matter of fact, the set-apart spirit, this is something that is completely alien to Christianity. They think that they speak in the spirit, that the spirit indwells them, and that it is all of this wonderful spiritual life. But the number of people that have actually had the spirit come upon them is very, very few. Particularly if we deal with those whom the spirit came upon, who then did or said something that Yahweh considered worthwhile. Probably can count them on 2 hands. That's how few amongst the 100 billion people that have come this way, humans. So the fact is that the spirit influences very few people. And when the spirit does come on individuals, like there is some indication the spirit came upon Moshe, there is absolute affirmation the spirit came upon David. And the choder, which is the role that Yahweh has asked me to play, it's testified in the 11th chapter of Yeshayah, if you're interested in considering it. The spirit is availed to the choder in 7 different ways. And so there are actually 7 spirits listed that apply to the choder, which is the stem off the main branch and the sucker that gives new life to the fallen stump, and the decaying rootstock of Yisrael. It's the only time in recorded history where an individual has been the beneficiary of 7 spirits. So the spirit, I must tell you, does not speak externally, but instead internally. She does not communicate independently from the Word of God, but rather enlightens us regarding it, particularly if you're one of those whom the Spirit has come upon for this particular purpose, although those would be very few individuals. The Spirit for those few individuals is inspiring, but not compelling. The Spirit does not make a racket. When she comes upon an individual, there is no audible sound. Further, the Ruach Kodesh does not teach us to speak in different languages, as the Christian New Testament will protest. What she makes apparent is the message of the Torah and prophets as scribed in Hebrew, and again, to those that Yahweh has chosen to understand his testimony and convey it with his children. This begins, again, digging themselves in further and further from the truth. And languages became apparent to them. So, were all of these people moot? They just sit around and babble before they didn't talk? What's the deal here? And languages became apparent. Don't you think that languages would be apparent to anybody living in Jerusalem at the time? In fact, it'd probably be hard pressed to find someone of any standing in Jerusalem that wasn't at least trilingual. They would have spoken Hebrew. They would have spoken Aramaic. They probably would have spoken Latin, and many would have spoken Greek, quadrilateral. No, the languages became apparent to them. Nonsense. Like a fire burning in them. Again, there is no evidence ever that the Spirit has started a fire. Not, and if it was in somebody, that'd be really bad. Yeah, and I guess that a demonic spirit can create the sensation of burning, but that's not helpful. And you don't learn a language by fire. My whole issue with those who burn the Quran rather than read the damn book is that, you shouldn't be doing that. You don't learn the language and the words of the Quran by burning it. So, and languages became apparent to them like a fire burning in them. And they were distributed, conferred, and appointed upon each one of them. So each one of them learned to speak languages like a fire burning in them, which you think would have destroyed the text of the language, but nonetheless, minor point, I suppose. And they were all individually filled with the Holy Spirit. Now, holy is a Christian religious concept. It's hagion here in Greek, which is the neuter of hagios. Chole in Hebrew, which is the language that would have been the dominant language of those living in the province of Judea in Jerusalem, has a word that would be transliterated holy. It is chole, and it speaks of a disease, a pandemic that is akin to a plague. So it's not a good concept. And further, the Ruach of Yahowah is not a pneuma. The Ruach of Yahowah is a spirit, and the spirit is not holy. Yahowah's spirit is set apart. Now, what that means is that Yahowah's spirit is part of Yahowah, distinct from anything that exists in our world, and that part of Yahowah can be set apart from him to serve those that Yahowah so chooses. But the Spirit is not an individual. The Spirit has no unique persona. The Spirit has no speaking role. The Spirit never once speaks. Throughout the entire Torah and prophets, we never once hear the Spirit speak. We never once hear the Spirit referred to as mom, as the breakaway cult would have their hive members believe. The Spirit is simply a part of Yahowah, just like his nephesh is part of Yahowah. It gives Yahowah capabilities in our world. The Spirit can be used to inspire people that Yahowah chooses to accomplish a message that would otherwise be impossible. I can tell you, just from my own personal experience, that the job I have been asked to do these last 23 years, and the one that I am doing now since mid-December, is just not possible without the Spirit. If I did not have Yahowah's seven spirits contributing to this, I would fail. It would be way too big a responsibility and require too much to be able to perform at this level for the creator of the universe, where you have to be accurate, you have to speak with authority, You have to be extraordinarily confident. You have to be able to absorb those 35 books that sit behind me on the shelf that are all free at yadayah.com, where I have composed every one of the translations. I even wrote these Greek translations that I'm sharing with you. So you imagine somebody writing amplified translations to fill 35 books and then writing a commentary on them and then deducing thousands of unique and profoundly important insights from them over 23 years, working 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. And then Yahowah waking up in the middle of a night and saying, all right, here's the rub there, young man. By comparison, I am young. That may be the only person I could be compared to as young at this point. He says, you've written enough books. One more book isn't going to make a whole heck of a lot of difference. I want you to start speaking to my people. And we're going to go into the video blogging business together, you and I. And that's how the Yahowah blog began. Now, the conversation went on for some time. It was the longest single conversation I've ever had with Yahowah. And it changed things profoundly. And I can tell you that, and it also changed them prophetically, because there's so many mentions of the written word, which is what we did for the first 23 years, developing and evolving into the spoken word at this time. But that transition would not have been possible without the help of the Spirit. So I am very familiar with what she can do, and there are 7 spirits of Yahowah, at least, because he delineates 7 spirits in Yeshayah 11. But I can tell you for certain that she is not holy, she is not religious, and she does not come upon groups of people. The only time in history that we're told that the Spirit came upon a group of people was after Moshe had a meltdown. And one of these days I will share with you the most horrific episode in Moshe's life. And it is one that was caused by the horrible attitude of the children of Israel. But Moshe overreacted by a gargantuan amount, and it just gave up, said, I can't do this anymore. And far worse than giving up, he blamed Yahowah for the mess that he was witnessing around him, as opposed to the people who had rebelled. And he said things to Yahowah that he never should have said. I'm sure he's embarrassed about them even to this day. But when he said, I can't do this anymore, and had his meltdown, Yahowah said, all right, then you think it's going to be better with help. You take the 70 elders and I'll share the Spirit that I've placed upon you with them. See how that works out for you. Sometimes Yahowah gives us what we want, even though when we ask for it, we should not have done so. I'm very careful not to ask Yahowah for a lot of things. I ask very few things of Yahowah because he knows what we need to succeed. And if I ask and it's something that is counterproductive, I would hope he would not give it to me. So I just avoid that problem by not asking him for it. But this is really a horrible problem for Christianity. It created the notion that there is a spirit out there that will come upon vast groups of people. And it's just not true. And if there is a significant indwelling of a spiritual being, then it's demonic. And one of the problems here is that Acts was written by Luke, who was Paul's healer and publicist. And Paul admitted in his second letter to the Corinthians in the last chapter that he was demon possessed. So this is a real problem for Christianity. And who were all individually filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak other languages, just as the Spirit gave them the ability to convey the spoken words. Again, this betrays the purpose. Again, there are very few people that are spiritually inspired. As the one who is the recipient of the 7 spirits of Yahowah, I can tell you most assuredly that the Spirit does not increase one's ability to speak languages that they do not know. Uh, my wife is laughing because sometimes I have diction issues even in English. But I take that as a source of pride because, well, Moshe revealed the Torah, and he claimed to have diction issues as well. So it runs in the family. The fact of the matter is that what the Spirit does, and the Spirit work is very well detailed in the book of Yeshaya, Isaiah, in the 11th chapter. But she emboldens. It takes a lot of courage to do this. I want to tell you, it's one thing to write it all down and to have it all out there and to allow people to criticize piecemeal and take things out of context and to give you a hard time over your writings. It's another thing to go from anonymity to saying that it's now obvious that these some 30 different accolades and attributes that Yahweh has prophetically spoken of hundreds and hundreds of times apply to the mission that we're undertaking together and becoming vulnerable to the naysayers that way. It takes considerable bravado to do what I did and write a 5-volume set using the Islamic scriptures to expose and condemn Islam when Muslims are murderous, and I've received thousands of death threats. It takes considerable chutzpah to write a 5-volume set exposing and condemning Christianity when Christians are so vicious regarding ad hominem attacks against any that would expose the flaws in their faith. The fact is that the Spirit makes this kind of boldness possible. I think you have to have it in you, just like Moshe clearly did, Dode clearly did, but none of us to the extent that are necessary when speaking for Yahweh against a world that is so opposed to him. So she emboldens. She equips in the sense of being more effective at doing the job. She enlightens. One of the things that I've come to appreciate is that through both she and, by the way, she enlightens, it's chama, which is the Hebrew word for she provides a skill set, and using discipline, a very disciplined, systematic approach to knowing where to look and then how to put the various pieces together that you're reading such that you're able to draw an effective and accurate picture of what God is saying. So it is a very disciplined approach to thinking that is chakma, and she supplies that. And then she supplies the thing that maybe I value more than anything else, and that is bien. This ability to make the connections between things that people miss so that you come to understand rather than simply know. And it even says that one of the 7 spirits is the Ruach of Yahweh, because to be the Kol voice of Yahweh, you have to have the Ruach of Yahweh in you to be able to communicate in this manner and be consistently accurate in your presentation of what God is offering us and expecting in return, as well as reintroducing Yehudim to Yahweh's name and reacquainting them with their Messiah, the Son of God and Savior, Dode, the returning King. And so these are the kinds of things that the set-apart Spirit provides. She does not provide the ability to speak other languages. And she comes upon, in almost all cases, one unique person at a time. So, sorry. And by the way, at the time that this was delivered, and this was probably written in around, say, 75 CE, it's depicting an act which would have taken place in 33 CE, although the Christian New Testament is unable to verify that. I have systematically figured out when Dode fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim, because he told us when he would do so when he visited with Daniel as Gabriel. But at the time, Yahweh really had no interest in the spoken language. It's one of the things that makes the Christian Jesus such an anomaly and an imposter among the prophets, because all of Yahweh's prophets wrote things down. It is the essence of who they were. Everything was committed to paper or parchment. In this particular case, paper wouldn't be invented until the 4th century CE. But everything was memorialized in writing. And the reason was it was the only way to pass on information accurately, even 15 minutes after it was spoken. There is no other way to do so. Accuracy is lost really in a matter of seconds after a spoken word is conveyed. And so all that God cared about, and it's evident throughout every one of his prophets, beginning with Moshe, was the conveyance of the written word, never spoken. And so it wasn't until, and here I am speaking to you, you might say, wait a minute, isn't that a contradiction? No. Because I too began by writing. That's why all these books sit behind me. I've written well over 20,000 pages because it is the best way intellectually and in terms of accuracy and consistency to communicate a message. Something, however, did change, and it had to evolve for us to be able to do this program that I'm doing with you. And that is that the likes of YouTube and Facebook in particular, and to a lesser degree X, had to create a medium whereby the spoken word could be conveyed, replayed, maintained, and such that it's actually never lost. And that you could replay it at whatever pace. You could put a narrative and text below the spoken word. Closed captions are what they're officially called, sometimes transcripts. That did not exist until about, 10, 15 years ago. And even then, there was no ability to use it because the thought police would not allow you to say the kinds of things that I need to say to speak for Yahweh. And it really wasn't until it began when Elon Musk bought Twitter, turned it into X, and was committed to free speech. And then Mark Zuckerberg decided that after he had been so abused and misled by the progressives in the Biden administration and afterwards in the election with Kamala, that he just said, this is ridiculous. I really don't have a group that are striving for accuracy. They're not fact checkers. They're just people with a extreme liberal political bias. And he fired them. And so Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook now create the forum that is the most comfortable for us to be able to convey this message. And I applaud him for doing so. YouTube is not quite there yet. They're the ones where you can't say many, many things, but it is getting ever so slightly better. Hopefully, Larry Page, he's a neighbor of mine, the next island over. Hopefully, he learns what Mark Zuckerberg learned and stops it with the thought police. But all in all, it wasn't until very recently that the spoken word had merit. And now, as of this last 6 months anyway, maybe less than that, actually, probably since January of this year, when Mark Zuckerberg made his bold announcement, the spoken word is now through this medium where we can turn on the lights and the camera, the microphone, and upload a live stream, and I can speak directly to you without any edits, without any second or third takes. Just sit in this chair day after day and speak directly to you, where you can see the expression on my face, my eyes, my gestures. You know that I'm convinced that what I'm sharing with you is true. I'm the living embodiment now of these books sitting behind me. I am doing precisely as God had asked, because at this very moment, this is the most effective way to communicate in the world. But my point is that 2,000 years ago, that was not the case. It was not even the case 20 years ago. And so there is a 0% chance that a representative of Yahweh, like the Ruach Kodesh, the set-apart spirit, would have enabled people to communicate in the spoken word. One of the great tragedies of the Christian faith is that they do not recognize how different the Torah, prophets, and Psalms are, which is a written text, than their New Testament, where the first books were not written by anyone who was even an eyewitness or participant in the events, but instead by Paul, the man who claimed to be demon-possessed, the very man who 666 years earlier, through Chabauk, Yahweh called the plague of death, calling him out by name. And he would write the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament, and it was after his death that those he had inspired and manipulated, Mark and Luke, wrote their gospel accounts based upon everything that Paul wanted them to convey. And so this is not a religion of letters. It is a religion of hearsay and make-believe. This is Acts 2, 3, and 4. Now, of course, this is wrong again. As I have shared, Yahweh has been abundantly clear. Shabuah will be fulfilled as an ingathering of saved souls, particularly Bokurim. It is not a language library or a universal translator implant. It is about a withdrawal, not a distribution. There will be no fires. Nothing is conferred. The set-apart spirit is being removed as she withdraws her voice, the very cold voice of God. No one known to Yah will be addressing earthlings at this moment. The time for spoken words in association with God will not have begun for almost 2,000 years thereafter. Therefore, up to this point, just 4 verses into Luke's narration of the non-event, Shimon Peter has managed to get everything wrong. He is hallucinating. He's not testifying. As we are aware, the Moedim, enduring witness regarding the restoring witnesses, denote appointments which are mikre, invitations to be called out and meet with Yahweh. They provide the means to the benefits of the covenant from the Bereth, which is the family agreement that Yahweh has established. The first 3, Pesach, Matzah, and Bokurim, were fulfilled by the Messiah, Dod, in year 4000 Yah, 33 CE. The final 3, Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah, will be fulfilled in concert with our King in year 6000 Yah, which is 2033. The Shabuah harvest is set between these dates, transpiring 7 years prior to Dod's return at the commencement of the time of Israel's troubles. That means on the Shabat of May 22nd, 2026. Cultivating this Qatsyr is the Choder's primary responsibility. It is one of the reasons he's called a branch, because a branch bears fruit. Since all of this was presented to us through Yahweh's prophets in Hebrew, accurate translations accompanied by appropriately discerned insights are the implements affecting this harvest. Yada Yahowah which are the name of the books behind me and on the shelf at yadayah.com, offered freely, is a legacy of 35 volumes, rich reservoir of resources, and its wide array of audio programs that are also part of this site now. And I think there's now about 130 hours or more of live stream audio presentations on a wide variety of subjects pertaining to who God is and who he is not, available here at Facebook, on X, on at least 4 YouTube channels, on Rumble, and on Odyssey. So we have certainly provided information that is needed for you to make an intelligent decision as to who God is not and who he is. So really all that is left between the Shabuah harvest and the return of the Passover lamb on Shabuah is us to complete our mission. Now, this is why the Yada Yahowah series exists. We recognize the value of rendering the testimony Yahweh conveyed in Hebrew into the language spoken by more Jews than any other and more people than any other. English has become the most universal language worldwide, and especially among God's people. A useful insight into understanding Peter's place and time, most literate individuals would have been bilingual or multilingual. In addition to Hebrew, they would have been reasonably fluent in Aramaic, which was the language of Babylon, for example, and they would have spoken Greek because of the influence of Alexander the not so great and the Macedonian conquest of the region, and certainly Latin due to the horrendous influence of imperial Rome on every part of the world that they touched. So the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans all influenced the spoken word. Now, if it were not for the popularity of the Pentecostal movement, where speaking in tongues is inanely interpreted to be praising God in a heavenly language as opposed to just babbling, I would not be required to state the obvious. This presentation indicates that those affected by Peter's spirit were allegedly equipped to speak in human languages, not God's. If they were to speak in the language of God, they would have been speaking in Hebrew, rendering the notion of speaking in the tongues of angels by muttering incomprehensible gibberish as nonsensical as the sounds themselves. The reason for the inclusion of the presence of the likes of a burning fire within them was to replace the experience that Moshe and the children of Israel had around Towrah when the Torah was being revealed in the presence of Yahweh's fiery light. These Christians were said to have experienced their own fire and thus their own God, their own divine light, their own spiritual voice, and their own New Testament under the auspice of their own replacement foolology. This invasive spirit, rather than enlightening masses of people, or a single person, I should say, at a time, was invasive and equipped multitudes to speak foreign language, although there is no evidence of this in history. And while there is no indication this ever occurred, that's true of really the entire Christian New Testament. What follows is yet another lie. It was scribed by Luke on Paul's behalf to besmirch Jews because, well, Paul was an anti-Semitic Jew, and those he rallied around him hated Jews as much as he did. For his new religion to prevail, Yehudim would have to be swept off center stage and replaced by a Gentile church. The difficulty of that, of course, is that there are thousands upon thousands of end times prophecies that Yahweh has communicated from the beginning in Bereshith and running all the way through Malachi that specifically state that he is going to reestablish his one and only covenant relationship with Yisrael and Yahudim, which would mean that the very notion of replacement foolology is indeed foolish. And now existing inside Jerusalem resided Yehudim, overtly pious men from every ethnicity under heaven. It just boggles the mind that there are so many Christians. Okay. Now, existing inside of Jerusalem resided Yehudim. That's like saying you're going to find tuna inside of a tuna fish can. Okay. It may be true, but you don't need to say it, all right? Overly pious. What? Pious how? Because what they're going to say is that he's going to claim that they were overtly opposed to what Peter was proclaiming. So if they were pious, which means they were somehow in sync with God's objectives and nature, they wouldn't be objecting to what Peter was trying to peddle. Now, but this is the reason I just laughed. They were Yehudim, men from every ethnicity under heaven. No. Oh, Yehudim is a race. Jews are a race. It's an ethnicity. They are not every ethnicity under heaven. They represent as an ethnicity less than 0.2% of humankind. So no, they cannot be every ethnos if they were Yehudim. And so now, when this voice, now it's a single voice, as opposed to many voices, came to exist in large assemblies of people. They were confused because each and every one heard what was spoken in his own language. Now, that just goes against the entire message that he's had up at this point. His point was that this imaginary spirit, whoof, like a fire, came upon them, and they were then able to speak all these other languages. But now, no. They're not speaking other languages. It's the ones hearing them that are able to hear what is said in another language in their language. Somewhere Luke needed an editor. I mean, a fact checker. Somebody with just a wee little bit of logic. So anyway, once again, he's just contradicted himself. Acts 2, 5, and 6. As is the case with so much of the Christian New Testament, the writer's attempts to paint Jews as hypocrites, overtly pious, and thus conniving and undeserving. They are contrived and contemptible. For example, Yehudim Jews are a unique ethnicity. Therefore, by definition, they cannot represent every race under heaven. This overture defines Goyim, which is what comprised the Christian church, not Israelites. Therefore, the writing quality is as deficient as it is insulting. This amalgamation of Jews into one monolithic perception was not a simple mistake, but instead sinister and deliberate. Peter and Paul, like Muhammad and Allah after them, wanted God's chosen people to be uniformly tarred with the same brush. The reason for this is that the Jews, unlike Gentiles, knew that the Christian apologists were lying. And this is because Peter and Paul had a nasty habit of misappropriating and misquoting their Torah and Nabi to establish their credibility. In essence, they lied to prove that they were lying. Having rejected Peter and then Paul, the Jews had to be silenced and discredited for either of these infamous men to be believed. That is what's happening here. Beyond suppressing Yehudim, Jews, for the Christian instigators to be perceived as plausible, their followers would have to become the recipients of the promises Yahweh made to the Israelites. And for that to occur, they would have to concoct schemes by which the God they did not know would become unreliable by rejecting his people and capricious by replacing them with others while breaking his promises. They sought to accomplish this absurdity by slandering Jews, attributing all manner of lies to them, doing so in a way that the entire race would be despised. In this way, Christianity became the product of anti-Semitism. The overall thought was they acted so badly that God got pissed off and decided that he was going to go with a different group of people. Well, the reason we know that's not true is twofold. One is they could not have been worse than they were during the Exodus. At no time in all of their history were Jews as miserable as they were during the Exodus. It's just time after time. They didn't even get out of Dodge or Towrah, as the case may be. In fact, they didn't even get out of the Sinai Peninsula before they started belly aching. So if God was going to give up on them because they had a shitty attitude, then I want to tell you, they'd have never made it through the Red Sea. They'd have never left Towrah. So God isn't giving up on his people because they've acted badly. That is a really lousy excuse, Christians. And it runs in the face of all of the evidence that is available. Second, as I have mentioned, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of prophecies regarding God's return with Dod and the fulfillment of the final Moedim, particularly Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah. And at this time, we know for certain, because Yahweh said it, that his reaffirmation of the covenant is going to occur through Israelites and Yehudim. So he couldn't have gotten pissed off at his people and substituted them for someone else and made hundreds, if not 1,000 prophecies stating otherwise. And of course, if this Christian God made hundreds and hundreds of prophecies and promises to his people, saying that he would honor them, and then he decided that he didn't want to honor them, it would make him capricious, would make him a liar. So why would anyone put their faith in a lying God? Something to think about, isn't it, Christians? The first strokes towards the end that Christians were trying to paint with sleight of hand appear in Paul's 14 epistles. The next are here in Acts, followed in chronological order by the slanderous and sour notes in Mark, Luke, and Matthew. At the very heart, Christianity exists as a twisted and immoral assault against Jews. It is one of many reasons that I am so committed to exposing and denouncing its putrid origins. Keeping it real, it would have been impossible for there have been a gathering representing every race on earth in this place at this time. Further, people are confused by languages they do not speak and not by their own native tongue. Yes, I am pointing out the obvious, and yet without someone ever having done so, billions have been misled by this errant assessment for a score of centuries. You may have also noticed that the scene changed, and it changed abruptly, without a single soul walking outside. From the room of co-conspirators within a single home to a widespread phenomenon heard throughout the entire city. Either narrative will neither narrative will transpire when the covenant members are withdrawn during Shabuah, because participation is the result of a deliberate, uniquely personal, and sequential process involving as few as 1 in a million individuals. But Acts was a fantasy, not reality. As we are quickly discovering, Peter was clueless regarding the Torah and prophets, his mission to promote his new religion based upon faith and spirituality, not knowledge or reality. He was the furthest thing from a prophet. Now, that isn't true of Paul. Paul knew the Torah and prophets quite well. He could not have written Galatians and Romans, but not really any of his letters, without being a rabbi and having studied the Torah and prophets. Paul was fairly ingenious, conniving really, cunning, in the way that he went about using nuances in the Hebrew text to substantiate his diversions from it. And had he not known what was written exceedingly well, he could never have done that. What he also did, of course, is that every statement that he appropriated for the purpose of underscoring his gospel, he twisted. He always misquoted God. He always took the statement out of context, and it was misapplied, such that you read the statement in context and accurately conveyed, 100% of the time, God's message was the exact opposite of what Paul was claiming. So he was conniving, but at least he knew the text. Peter, no. He was just a complete and utter dunderhead. Clueless. His mission, however, was to promote his new religion based upon faith and spirituality, not upon any form of reality. Fortunately for us, we do not live under the influence of Peter or Paul's Roman Catholic Church. Given the opportunity, they would have tortured me to death as a deterrent to keep me from sharing and you and others from knowing the truth. And yet, sadly, today they are distracted, tormenting little children instead. It is bewildering that so many believe that Peter's irrational rant was inspired by God, even worse than inferring that God is a nincompoop, not knowing his own script or schedule, by attributing his verbal diarrhea to the Almighty. Christians slander God as capricious and unreliable. He is demeaned as the deity who withdrew the countless promises he had made to Israel, only to transfer them to Goyim, whom he told his people to avoid their ways. It turns the Christian God into a false prophet because their schemes nullify many hundreds of prophecies which claim otherwise. But let's not sweat the details. Eggs have to be broken and scrambled to create an omelet. And besides, those who promote their faith have no qualms overturning God or turning God into a liar, even into an anti-Semite, because they created their deity in their image. And by doing so, they are heralded as saints. Now back to reality, the Romans who controlled Judea, those whose, I guess we should say, whose empire evolved into the Roman Catholic Church, particularly during the time of Theodosius, were far worse than the Jews throughout the history of the religion, and that would really never change. So it is a travesty that so many have been beguiled by the Roman and then Roman Catholic influence, where they were savages, where they were overt liars, power-hungry zealots, for claiming that God was theirs to use as they saw fit. And this religion that they conceived was among the most anti-Semitic, dishonest, internally contradictory, and errant ever known to man. If it weren't for this most recent alliance between progressives and Muslims, where Islam is the most overtly demonic language or religion ever conceived, and it's certainly the deadliest, the most prone to terrorism. I would have stated bluntly that the Roman Catholic Church has had the greatest negative influence on humanity. And while I think that has been true for most of the last, say, 1800 years, in the last 1400 years, it's it's challenged now, where one would be hard pressed not to say that Islam, particularly as it now is supported and uplifted and tolerated by progressives, has become the greatest threat to life and liberty on our planet. I'm going to share one more line from this, and then we will end this program for today and begin where we leave off this evening when we have our family hour with Kirk and with Kevin later this evening. So, continuing to slander the chosen people on behalf of the worst of people, we read, "And besides, they were out of their minds, and they were surprised. Look, are not the entirety of them who are speaking Galatians?" Or no, I think they wrote Galileans. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Paul's letters, but Galileos is the Greek term. Are they not all Galileans? Okay. Acts 2:7. Galilee at the time would be like saying they're from the swamplands, the mosquito-infested region of Judea. It is now beautiful because of what's been done to it and the aquaforming that the Jews have done to make it the great watershed. But at that time, this was not the case, and so it was filled with swampamongers and some fishermen, but not of any great prowess. And so it was a way of making the Jews from Jerusalem seem snobby. They were from Brooklyn, as a New Yorker would say. They're from the wrong side of the tracks, Yeah, so that's really what they were trying to infer here. It'd be like someone from Bel Air saying, well, they were from Watts. Well, and besides, they were out of their minds. Who was out of their minds? I'm assuming he's trying to demean the Jews. Well, Jews have been mistaken about God for 3,400 years. And they are mistaken in the way right now they're responding to Islam and its attack on them on 10/7. Jews are still the smartest people in the world. They have an average IQ that's 15 points above normal. And that's remarkable. They are responsible as a 0.2% minority for about 40% of the most important inventions of the modern world. So they're not out of their minds. So that's just a derogatory statement. And they were surprised. What were they surprised by? Not by language. Look, are not the entirety of them who are speaking from Galatia. The fact of the matter is, we were just told that every ethnicity under the earth was there, so they cannot have all come from one region, the Sea of Galilee region of Judea. Now, pointing out the obvious again, the co-conspirators gathered on this day were Jewish, as were each of the celebrants, thereby rendering the entire diatribe absurd. Galilee was used as a pejorative because it was a swampy, mosquito-infested lowland beneath Jerusalem in status and in elevation. It was inserted to make the Jews appear like snobs. Furthermore, if the entirety of them who were speaking were from Galilee, then there would have been people, could not have been people of every ethnicity. And since the visible fulfillment of Passover 7 weeks ago didn't garner anyone's attention, according to Peter, it was something really to be avoided. How were the words here going to change that on this day? If no one even bothered to notice what happened on Pesach and Matzah and Bakurim, and now you want to say that everybody was noticing this from some Galileans? Anyway, this dialogue demonstrates the inherent fraud associated with the Christian New Testament. At the very earliest, Acts was written 3 decades after the fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim by Dode, and probably 4 decades, and well beyond the time a specific conversation could have been accurately recalled. In fact, about 5 minutes later is about the length of time that it can be accurately attested, if it's not written down or recorded. Luke, its author, was not an eyewitness to any of these events, making his account entirely hearsay and therefore inadmissible. So these narratives were simply made up by either those who never so much as even met the key players in this drama, or by those responsible for promoting the myths in the first place. So continuing to point out the obvious, pious Jews would have spoken Hebrew, not Greek. Further, the Roman legions which occupied Jerusalem were comprised of conscripts and slaves from throughout the empire. Under such circumstances, the sound of foreign language would not have driven anyone crazy or been the least bit surprising. Much of the Christian New Testament is comprised of awkward and unattested conversations. Not only were they contrived, they were projected upon an entire population, all to condemn the Jewish people. That way, the Christians could not only claim superiority, they would have a common enemy and a readier excuse for their horrid behavior. So this is how the demonic leader of the diabolical cult alleges his divine sanction to harass Jews began. And based upon the number of nations represented in the breadth of distinct dialects recorded among the discordant voices of the emerging cult, it appears that Judea hosted the Olympic Games in 33 CE. I wonder who won the gold medal in religious oratory and anti-Semitic slander. I'll read this with you and we'll end this program. Somehow, each and every one hears them speak in the distinct language and dialect of their birth. Now, again, we're back to the same thing. If you are somehow imbued with the Spirit, we'll just play along with them for a moment, so that you can speak all these different languages, and that you can speak things that are actually sensible, as opposed to just muttering whatever you might want to say, then the people listening would be able to listen in the language they understand. But now they're saying that the people who were not so inspired so that they could speak all of these languages by their spirit, suddenly were the ones who were doing the translations, but in their heads. That makes absolutely no sense. And it could not have been part of this process of the alleged Holy Spirit. Anyway, somehow, each and every one hears them speak in the distinct language and dialect of their birth. Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and those who live in Mesopotamia, Yahudah, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, Philygria, Pamphylia, Egypt, and parts of Libya toward Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, only Yehudim and newcomers, Cretians and Arabs, listening to them in their own tongue, the magnificent things and the powerful works of the God. Acts 2, 8 through 11. Now, I have so much to say about this, and I think it's best that I thank you for listening, that we will resume this evening during family hour, and we will have fun at the expense of the Christian religion, because it is this rubbish that must be cleared away for God's people to have a better understanding of what Shabuah actually represents, when it will be fulfilled, as well as who served as the Messiah and Son of God when he did so, and what it means to their lives. So I thank you for listening. This has been the YAHOWAH blog, and I am your host, Craig Winn.